Is the alien abduction encounter of Armando Zubaran one of the most important in history? It is certainly one of the most detailed. Rather than just being on board an otherworldly vehicle under duress and strapped to a table before being returned a short time later, Zubaran's encounter would stretch over multiple days and would see him experience life on board the spacecraft in the same way the extraterrestrial crew members would. According to the account, in the early hours of one January morning of 1954 at around 2 a.m., Armando Zubaran was driving along a road between Mexico City and Acapulco on his way to a meeting with a business partner the following day. He was hoping if he drove through the night, he would arrive at his destination just before dawn. As he was making his way along the winding roadways, he suddenly began to feel an intense tiredness. In fact, more than feeling tired, he began to feel as though he was slipping into a severe state of lethargy. Worried he would lose control of the vehicle, he pulled the car to the side of the road. He took a moment to refocus and then raised his head toward the windscreen in order to set off once again. However, there in front of him was a scene he couldn't quite believe. A short distance from his car was a brilliantly lit object in the middle of the road. Even more alarming, several strange men, each wearing the same overall-type clothing, were standing on the road outside the object. He remained in his car watching the scene in front of him. Then, without recalling how, he was suddenly outside of the car and walking towards the glowing craft. At each side were the strange men, seemingly guiding him to the object, which he stepped onto. As he looked around inside the futuristic vehicle, he blurted out a question, asking why they had chosen to take him. To his surprise, one of them answered. He was told that he was neither the first nor would he be the last person to be taken from Earth for testing, adding that they always attempted to choose the best people to transmit their message to the wider population. After going through several details of his life, which he claimed were displayed on a screen like a television in front of him, he was walked around the craft by one of the strange men. He was told that during this walk, he was free to ask any questions he wished. He was also informed that they were now no longer on Earth, but were traveling through space. Zubaran would recall several specific details from his conversation with this apparent extraterrestrial entity. And what is particularly interesting is that many of the details of the craft's propulsion and how it traverses space resonate very nicely with whistleblower testimony that would surface decades later, perhaps most specifically that from Bob Lazar. Zubaran would offer, for example, that the craft he was on operated using a gravity repulsion system. This system would scan space ahead of them and then dispel any objects in their path. It would then bend space-time to it before releasing it again, which would move the craft with the section of space that had been bent towards it. In total, he would spend several days on board the craft, eating, sleeping, and washing as the crew did. For example, he would state that the shower system on the ship was similar to being covered in warm air that gradually increased in strength before changing to damp air that impregnated the skin. Liquid soap was then applied to the body, which was blasted dry, leaving the body clean. He further recalled how their diet, by and large, was very similar to ours and featured a combination of vegetables, starches, and grilled meats. They also drank many different fruit juices and ate a particular fruit that was similar to a mango. What is perhaps interesting about this last detail is that some researchers, perhaps most prominently Timothy Good, have asserted that many UFO encounters feature extraterrestrials examining and taking samples of many plants, particularly fruit processing ones. Might the fact that fruits apparently feature so heavily in their diet be the reason for this? Another thought-provoking detail offered by Zubaran was that the provisions for the crew would arrive on the ship through telepathy. Essentially, they would think what they required into existence. Once more, this had the echoes of the legends of Ptah, the ancient Egyptian creator god, who was said to have imagined the world into existence, and he did so from a winged chair. Might the winged chair have been some kind of advanced technology that changed thoughts into physical manifestations? We should also keep in mind some of the recent findings of quantum physics that revolves around the notion of particles not physically existed until a person physically observes them. There were, however, further, even more mind-blowing revelations. They would speak to Zubaran of an ideology of collaboration over competition. This has led to 3,000 years of utopia in their society. Of more interest, this was largely due to the teachings of the beloved number 9, or the Master. What is interesting about this mentioning of a beloved number 9 is that during the channeling experiments of the United States government under Project Penguin, they claim to have made contact with an otherworldly entity from the reaches of the cosmos, calling itself the 9, who was an eternal presence that watched over humanity. Was this the same entity as the beloved number 9 that Zubaran's abductors spoke of? Following the several days he spent in space, Zubaran was returned to his car at the roadside. To his disbelief, no time whatsoever had passed on Earth. Unsure what to do, he would continue on his way to his pre-planned business meeting, which went ahead as if nothing out of the ordinary had taken place, which of course to everyone else it hadn't. Amazingly, a second incident occurred 15 years later in 1969, just outside of Mexico City. According to the account, Zubaran pulled over to the roadside in order to give a ride to a hitchhiker. To his amazement, the individual revealed himself to be one of the crew members from his encounter a decade and a half previously. Unfortunately, that is all that is known about this second meeting, with no other details on record. It is an encounter, however, that was clearly instigated by the extraterrestrials themselves. Another example of pre-planned, targeted intervention. We might contemplate how many other times these meetings have taken place, meetings Zubaran might simply not recall. There are several intriguing details and points we can take away from the encounters of Armando Zubaran. Not least that he was purposely targeted by these otherworldly beings. Whether he made good on spreading the aliens' message, other than speaking of his encounter, of course, remains unknown. It is perhaps some of the details left out of the account that lends it the most credibility. There was no mention of his abductor's home planet, for example, at a time when many alleged abductees were claiming contact with beings from Venus or Mars. He also made no effort to cash in on his encounter, or more specifically, the alleged messages from these aliens, something a charlatan surely would have done. Might we assume that many others like Armando Zubaran have been targeted and abducted by these same extraterrestrials? We should also note that the extraterrestrials in this account are decidedly human-like, and not at all like the grey alien entities that would feature so prominently in alien abduction cases of the 1970 onwards. Might we take from this, then, as many researchers, investigators, and whistleblowers have put forward, that multiple races of alien beings are visiting Earth and have been doing for some time? And what should we make of the mention of a master entity, a beloved number 9? At the time of Zubaran's encounter, knowledge of the Project Penguin channeling experiments, much less what was revealed in them, was not in the public arena. Might these extraterrestrials living in a utopia under the guidance of this 9 be attempted to bestow similar values onto humanity through the teachings and then subsequent interactions of the abductee following that? We might also contemplate if we accept that these human-like extraterrestrials and grey aliens are different civilizations altogether, whether there's a long, drawn-out war taking place, one that has been raging for thousands of years, and that is for the minds or even the souls of humanity. The legends of good versus bad and even angel versus demon perhaps take on a new meaning when viewed with an extraterrestrial presence in mind. Could it really be that humanity is part of a cosmic battle that has been fought for longer than we can imagine, with ourselves at the center for reasons even we can't fully understand or appreciate? Has this constant war been written off as legends and tales of heaven and hell and God versus the devil? Indeed, it just might prove to be the case that the account of Armando Zubaran and ones like this are of much more importance than even some UFO researchers might realize. They might not only have much to tell us about the UFO and alien question, but could also reveal a fuller picture of our history, our present, and the true nature of our collective reality. What makes the alien abduction of Erwin Lohre particularly intriguing is the number of details that are usually found in paranormal cases of hauntings and poltergeist activity. At the same time, it is heavily suggestive of an organized abduction program that sees a person perhaps abducted multiple times during their lifetime, and one that uses alien implant devices to monitor and seemingly target those they choose to abduct. In the early hours of March the 9th, 1993, at a little after midnight, Erwin Lohre was asleep with his wife in their home in northern Germany when he awoke due to a sudden intense pain in his lower spine. He would venture from the bedroom and seek out a strong painkiller before returning to bed in an attempt to go back to sleep. However, by the time he returned, his wife was now also awake. And what's more, they could both hear a strange buzzing sound seemingly coming from outside the house, a sound that Lohre would later describe as being metallic. As the couple remained still, attempting to locate the source of the sound, a glowing, round object suddenly became visible in the sky through their bedroom window. The object hovered a short distance away, just above the nearby trees, and it was so bright that the entire street, including their house, was now awash in its bright neon-type glow. Even more bizarre, as the husband and wife stared out of their window at this truly curious aerial anomaly, they each noticed a strange and unpleasant metallic taste overtake their mouths. At this point, Erwin went to climb out of bed once more. However, when he did so, he realized he was unable to move his legs. He turned to his wife, the confused and frightened look on her face telling him that she was experiencing the same thing. Then, as they sat upright, helplessly in their bed, a yellow light began flashing on and off outside their house and continued to do so for around 30 seconds. Then, the light stopped, and the disc-shaped object suddenly went into motion, zipping past their bedroom window and disappearing into the distance. Almost immediately after the craft had gone, both the Lohres were able to move once again. Now unable to sleep though, each of them got out of bed and discussed just what they had witnessed. However, around half an hour later, the curious humming sound returned. This time though, the sound was coming from the back of the house. Both of them rushed to the back window of the bedroom. As they looked out, they could see the disc-shaped craft only several hundred feet away, and it was heading straight for them. As it got closer, they would recall how its silver exterior shimmered with all the colors of the rainbow, while on the underside they could see 3 bright lights shining downward. The futuristic craft continued towards them. Then, when it was a matter of feet from colliding with their property, it simply evaporated, as if it had dissolved into thin air. Just like that, it was gone. The pair looked out into the night. It was now peaceful and serene, as if nothing out of the ordinary had ever taken place. They each contemplated just what they had witnessed. The following day, Erwin would contact the local newspaper and offer them details of what he and his wife had seen and experienced the previous evening. The newspaper ran a story of their encounter on the following day, which prompted 25 other witnesses to contact Erwin to state they too had seen a similar object on the same evening, including an entire bowling team returning home from a match. Given the sheer number of witnesses that corroborated that something strange was over the town that evening, there was no possibility that the incident could be put down to a joint hallucination between Erwin and his wife. Frustratingly though, while the other witnesses were happy to discuss their sightings with Erwin privately, none wished to talk about them publicly and put them on the official record. One UFO researcher who had gotten wind of the case, Dr. Hatwig, would ask Erwin if he believed he had been intentionally targeted by the UFO. He replied that he believed that he had, offering that it was hovering right outside the bedroom window as if the occupants knew exactly where he was. The events that would follow the sighting would appear to confirm this, and they were bizarre and unsettling events indeed. The day after the incident, at around 4 p.m, while he and his wife were watching television with their young daughter, there was a sudden flash like a photo bulb went off in the room, followed by a crackling sound. On that same evening at around 10 p.m, a loud, ominous banging was heard coming from one of the wardrobes upstairs. When Erwin went to check, flinging the wardrobe doors open, the banging suddenly stopped. The wardrobe was empty of anything but clothes. However, a short time after shutting the doors and leaving the room, the disturbing banging began again. These types of eerie happenings continued on and off for several weeks. Erwin would also suffer from increasingly intense pain in his lower back. Then, by chance one morning, he noticed two strange marks right at the base of his spine. When these marks were examined by a doctor, two black spots were visible under them. He was booked to have a CAT scan to examine the markings more closely. However, before the procedure could go ahead, the two black lumps came out of his back. Erwin attempted to preserve these so they could be examined. However, by the following day, they had each melted away into nothing. We might note that this detail of implants dissolving a short time after being removed or having fallen from a person's body shows up in many other cases involving these extraterrestrial devices. Erwin Lohre, for all that had happened to him, declined the opportunity to undergo hypnotic regression. And while it is understandable that some people do not wish to unlock memories their brain has hidden from them, or that they simply don't trust the authenticity of such procedures, it's perhaps a shame that any further potential information will likely remain locked away forever. Just what had happened to Erwin Lohre that spring night in 1993? Was he the victim of alien abduction? If not on the night of the sighting, at some other point in his life? After all, someone or something had to have placed the strange black devices into his lower back. Might the abduction have taken place before he awoke in order to obtain the painkiller? And could the other encounters have also taken place? We might recall that Erwin very much believed that the UFO had targeted him specifically. We might also contemplate just why an alien race, presumably far advanced from ourselves and from elsewhere in the universe, would be so concerned with very specific members of the human population. Indeed, why do they appear to target certain people and have little interest in others? Might it be a certain blood group, a certain level of overall fitness, or perhaps simply, after random selection, a person is then tracked and abducted repeatedly throughout their lives? Or might we find that Erwin's family, going back generations, have also been victims of alien abduction, and he is simply the latest in a long line of studies and examinations going back to his first unfortunate ancestor when this bizarre program first began? And what should we make of the many paranormal incidents that occurred following the sighting of the apparent alien aircraft? Might the electrical interference with appliances and gadgets be something to do with the strange implants that had been placed in Erwin's lower back? Or might UFOs and their occupants have a more paranormal explanation than many others might think? Why, for example, did the disc-shaped object appear to dissolve into thin air, much in the same way that people might describe a ghost or spooky manifestation vanishing right before their eyes? Might what we know as ghosts, UFOs, and aliens exist and come from the same realm of existence? Above all else, we might consider just what the agenda and end goal is of the apparent alien race behind Erwin Lohre's encounter might be, and what it might mean for humanity as a whole. Just why are they tracking people with strange devices inserted discreetly into their bodies? Devices that would appear to dissolve away when removed, leaving no proof of their existence. Are these interventions for our benefit? Or might we find the agenda to be much more malevolent, a discovery we are perhaps in danger of making all too late if we fail to understand and decipher encounters such as Erwin Lohre's and many others like this that continue to happen today? Was an entire family abducted from their vehicle on a lonely road somewhere in Georgia as they traveled from Tennessee to Florida in 1968. The Falcon family, a father, mother, and their 4-year-old son, Celestian, were traveling from Tennessee to their would-be new home in Florida, the result of Celestian's father's sudden transfer to the Sunshine State by the military. While they made their way along a road somewhere in the state of Georgia, Celestian noticed a strange glowing object in the sky following them no more than 200 yards away. The young boy watched the object for several moments, and when he heard his mother let out a sharp scream, he realized that she had seen it too. At around the same time, the object began to move closer to their moving car. Celestian noticed that there were several large red lights on its underside, while on the top half came a paler glow that appeared to emanate from several windows. He also noticed how other motorists were speeding up to get away from the strange object, or even performing U-turns to go the other way. All, that is, except one vehicle which came to stop at the side of the road a short distance away. As Celestian watched this car, he noticed that the engine of their own vehicle had suddenly cut out, and they came to a stop a short distance away. He noticed his father looking in the rearview mirror, watching both the obscure object now hovering a short distance away and the other motorist behind them. With that, his father reached for his gun from inside the glove box and opened the car door. The instant his father stepped foot outside the vehicle, the object moved from where it was to directly over him. His father rushed back inside the car and attempted to start the engine several times, all of which failed. As this was happening, Celestian's mother pushed him further down into the back seat, telling him to remain still and not to make a sound. Even from where he sat, however, he could still see clearly out of the back seat window of the vehicle. He could see the other car that had pulled over to the side of the road just before them, and he noticed that the motorist, like his father, had also gotten out of his vehicle. Then, from out of nowhere, several strange alien creatures, each around 5 feet tall, approached and surrounded the man. Celestian watched as the unfortunate man struck out at one of the creatures with what appeared to be a tire iron. Before he could make contact, though, one of the figures touched a bizarre silver prod to his body, which clearly and immediately paralyzed him. They then proceeded to wrap the man and his girlfriend in strange silver blankets before sending them into the air and into their awaiting craft. As he watched the scene unfold a short distance away, a bright pink light suddenly shined down on their own car. A moment later, the car door opened and a bizarre-looking hand reached inside. At this point, Celestian blacked out. When he awoke, he appeared to be inside the spacecraft, and of more concern, he had been separated from his family, who remained together in another part of the room. He could still hear his mother screaming hysterically. The next thing he realized, a reptilian-like alien was carrying him down a set of stairs and into another large room. This one had large windows on one side and an operating light table in the middle. When he managed to glance out of the window, he could see the road they had been driving on outside. When he cast his eyes back around the room, however, he was met with a particularly grim sight. Against the walls, including beneath the windows, he could see row upon row of jars that contained human fetuses. There were also several doorways that led out of this main room. For reasons he couldn't understand, he knew these rooms were cold storage rooms like walk-in refrigerators. He noticed his family had also been brought into this room. His mother, still very much hysterical, was placed on the table and a large silver needle was used to inject her. She instantly fell calm. Before Celestian could see anything else, he was taken out of the room by the reptilian creature and through one of the waiting doorways. As he entered this room, he squinted his eyes at how bright it was. He could make out more reptilian creatures that were seemingly engaged in activities near a control panel. However, it is what he could hear that was of most concern to the young boy. He could hear a woman scream in a room next door to where he stood, as well as the shouts of a man pleading for help, saying, "We're being attacked by monsters." As this was happening, Celestian noticed the two grey alien creatures had entered the room. Bizarrely, each was wearing a NASA-style spacesuit, complete with helmets on their heads. Even stranger, a human in a dark business suit also appeared. At this point, Celestian was on the verge of mental collapse. This mysterious man began speaking to the other creatures in the room, although he appeared to do so telepathically. What is particularly strange was that Celestian could also hear and understand this telepathic communication. According to what he could remember, the alien entities were searching for an alien device that had become lost in the muddy swamps of Georgia. They had, he recalled, found part of this device, but were still missing a section of it, and so another search was ordered by the human. Celestian was taken through several rooms before eventually stopping in a particularly busy part of the ship. All around him was a hive of activity, as if some kind of emergency was taking place. He picked up further snippets of information, most predominantly that their craft had been discovered and somebody was on their way to destroy them. At this point, Celestian felt a real surge of panic go through him, a panic he believed that he picked up from the occupants of the craft themselves. Another voice strayed into his head, stating that whoever was on their way, they were getting close. Then, on a screen on the wall, video of 2 United States Air Force fighter jets appeared. Several of the creatures turned to watch the screen. Celestian would later recall that it was so close up and detailed that he could clearly see the pilots' faces through the glass of the cockpit. He could also sense that these jets were approaching the alien craft and their intent was to attack and destroy it. Activity exploded all around the young boy, who simply stood in the room watching what was taking place. All the while, snippets of telepathic communication between the alien entities went through his mind. They planned to travel back in time by 40 minutes to before the radar had picked them up, and so avoid the ensuing confrontation. Suddenly, one of the entities picked up Celestian and strapped him to a silver table. He must have been administered some kind of injection, as he blacked out a moment later. When he awoke, a human in the suit was standing over him, and he and his family were being led back to their car. Although he wasn't certain, he had the impression that several experiments had been performed on him while he was moving in and out of consciousness. As they sat in the car, his parents appeared to be in apparent trance-like state. Things remained calm for several moments before his mother and father appeared to snap back to the moment. His mother immediately started screaming, urging her husband to step on the gas and get them out of there, which he duly did. As Celestian looked out of the rear window, he could see the object rise into the air and disappear into the sky. As the years went on, both his parents would refuse to speak about the night in question, or to even acknowledge that it ever happened. However, strange incidents would continue around the family home, including the sudden appearance of grey alien entities that would appear in Celestian's room in the middle of the night as if they had walked right through the bedroom wall. During these encounters, his parents would often awaken in a similar-like trance state as they were being led back to their car following their abduction. And on one occasion, a neighbour even claimed to have seen a bizarre object hovering over the top of their home. It would appear that Celestian was the target of repeat alien abductions for some time following that initial encounter on a lonely Georgia highway. If the Falcon family alien abduction is true, it gives us plenty to consider, not least that a systematic and planned abduction program is taking place for reasons unknown to us. And what's more, there appears to be a human presence to these abductions. Even more remarkable, these alien entities that feature both reptilian and grey alien creatures have the apparent ability to travel back in time. On how many occasions might this have happened? And might this explain why these bizarre crafts are there 1 minute and gone the next? Above all else, though, we have to ask, what is the end goal of these apparent systematic abductions, and will they be for the benefit or the detriment of humanity? Did a woman suffer an attempted abduction at the hands of invisible aliens in France in 1950? Quite literally. An encounter known as the Black Hands case is without doubt one of the most thought-provoking and perplexing accounts connected to alien abduction on record. It is also one that is unique and an encounter that doesn't conform to other claims of extraterrestrial interaction, both of the times and in the modern era. According to the account, at around 4 p.m. on May the 19th, 1950, an unnamed woman was near the River Loire in Cours-les-Bas in France when she noticed a bright light, similar to a star, moving across the sky. She continued to watch this bizarre aerial anomaly until it came to a sudden stop. It remained motionless for several moments before rising into the sky, stopping and remaining still once more. Then, giving off a slight flash, the object disappeared high into the air with great speed. As perplexed and intrigued as she was, the woman, by and large, put the incident out of her mind. That is, until the following afternoon when she was walking along the river once more, she witnessed a similar light moving overhead, exactly as she had done the previous afternoon. This time, though, the light would come much closer to the woman. In fact, the light came so close that it almost enveloped her completely. Then, things turned even stranger and decidedly more ominous. To her shock and belief, the woman watched as two black-gloved hands emerged out of the light and reached towards her. She noticed how they had a yellow tint to them and were seemingly very strong. They remained where they were, as if ready to catch something thrown towards them. As she continued to watch them, and for reasons she didn't understand, she began walking forward towards the light. Almost as soon as she did so, the hands, with no visible arms, reached out and took hold of either side of her head. And what's more, they did so, violently squeezing hard on each side and shaking her head, and in turn, her entire body in a jerking motion. At one point, her head was pulled forward and she felt it strike an invisible torso, but one that appeared to be made of iron as opposed to flesh and bone. At the same time, she could feel the air around her turning increasingly cold as the squeezing on her head began once more. The fingers, which felt particularly cold and unhuman-like, covered her eyes, nostrils, and mouth. She struggled to breathe and began to panic somewhat. Then she felt something akin to a lightning bolt run through her. Suddenly, she began to swing back and forth, and she got the impression that the black hands were carrying her somewhere. The arms that the hands were seemingly attached to remained invisible to her, but she could almost definitely feel them against her shoulders. It was at this point that the distraught woman began to hear a strange, muffled laugh that, while it sounded as though it was coming from a relative distance, she assumed it came from her invisible attacker. Without warning, they came to a sudden stop. A moment later, she felt a blow to her back, seeming to her to have come from an invisible knee. So hard was the blow that it forced her to the ground, where a pressurized force immediately settled on her and forced her to lay down flat. After a moment or two, she was moving around, this time being dragged along the ground. This continued for several moments before they came to a stop once more. After several seconds, she heard a voice speak in French. It said, "There she is, we got her." Another voice replied, but this one was too muffled and too far away for her to make out what it had said. Before she could contemplate anything else, she found herself being dragged along the ground once more. This went on for some time, causing her to panic again. Just as she thought she was about to lose consciousness, the dragging stopped. She was free of the invisible grip and found herself laying alone in the middle of a field. She quickly checked her purse and found that all of her money was still there. Robbery, then, was not the reason for this obscure attack. She then got to her feet, brushed herself down, and quickly scanned her surroundings, fully expecting to find the person who had dragged her here to be watching her. However, there was nobody else there, and she was completely alone. Or at least she thought so. Just as she was beginning to think that her bizarre ordeal was over, she noticed a section of the grass in front of her pressed down, as if an invisible foot had just stepped there. She braced herself, expecting an invisible grip to seize her. However, nothing else happened, and all she could hear or feel was the wind blowing around her. She looked down at herself and realized that she had cuts and scratches on her arms and legs, while she could feel what appeared to be a burning sensation on her back. What's more, all of her muscles ached, and she had a bitter, metallic taste in her mouth. As she looked around, she noted a light in one of the houses by the river. She started out towards it. However, after taking only a few steps, a blinding white light flashed before her eyes. She wasn't sure what had happened, but she had the impression that something had just taken off from the ground nearby and risen into the air with great speed. Now extremely frightened and confused, the woman made her way straight home. She would later report the encounter to the local police. A search of the field where she had found herself revealed strange scorch marks on the ground, and several of the trees had suffered considerable damage. However, despite these findings, there was no satisfactory explanation offered as to what had happened to the anonymous woman, and the case remains unresolved. Just what might have happened that evening? There are several possibilities for us to consider. Might it be that this unfortunate woman was the victim of an attempted alien abduction? If this is the case, why wasn't she taken on board a futuristic craft like many others who make such claims? And if aliens were behind this bizarre and unsettling attack, for what purpose was it carried out? It appeared that no experiments or communication took place. In fact, the whole episode seemed to revolve around the testing of some kind of technology that allowed someone or something the ability to physically take control of someone from a destination far away. Might we consider then that her tormentors, that late afternoon near the River Loire, were not of an extraterrestrial nature but were in fact human? We might recall that the witness heard somebody speaking in her native French stating that we got her. Might this suggest that she was the unwilling participant in the testing of some kind of futuristic technology, one that allowed a person to physically grab and then control somebody from afar? We might also recall that while the witness could hear the voice of whom she presumed was her attacker clearly, the reply she heard was muffled and seemingly much further away. Might this also suggest some kind of remote technology with some kind of bizarre out-of-body remote control experiment taking place from a secret location many miles away? We know, for example, that remote viewing has been the subject of studies by various intelligence agencies around the world for decades. Might it be that this encounter with the black-gloved hands was another branch of these experiments, ones that allowed some kind of physical interaction? Or might those behind the attack on this mystery woman not have been extraterrestrial or human, but beings from another dimension? Might the light she witnessed, a light which grew much larger as it got closer, have been the result of a portal opening, and so allowing an interdimensional creature to reach through from their realm of existence into ours? And if so, was this an intentional crossing of dimensions on their part, or something that was a one-off opening of such gateways? Of course, regardless of who or what was behind the attack, perhaps the most important question would be for what purpose was it carried out? Was it merely an opportunistic assault, or might there have been an agenda adhered to that is simply unknown to those who have investigated the case? The fact is, we are unlikely ever to know just what took place to the unnamed woman in France that spring afternoon in 1950. The account, though, continues to fascinate researchers today, almost 3/4 of a century later. And it is very much worth keeping this strange, curious encounter in the public consciousness, lest other similar incidents are uncovered or indeed take place in the future.
The San Fernando Valley is no stranger to UFOs. There's been quite a large number of incidents reported over the last 20 years. Strange balls of light and even large triangular crafts have been sighted. Though a thorough investigation has been carried out numerous times, these mysterious objects remain unexplained. But as you'll discover, those who have witnessed UFOs may go on to have far more unusual encounters. Nobody knows for sure what these mysterious beings were doing in the area of a local school. It's almost surprising that they didn't engage with Susan, even though they came more or less eye to eye. For Susan, her life has changed dramatically, as you can imagine. She now knows not to dismiss such stories of UFOs and their occupants so easily. Though she remains curious, she recalls how scared she was and hopes never to come eye to eye with these beings ever again.
Many people believe that alien encounters take place only in remote areas. Nothing, however, could be further from the truth. In fact, aliens seemingly turn up in some of the most unexpected places. For example, the following incident involves an encounter that took place in the front courtyard of an elementary school in the middle of a densely populated suburb of Los Angeles. It also involves one of the clearest and most extensive descriptions of alien beings researchers had ever investigated, which all started with a UFO sighting a few years earlier. The witness, Suzanne D., worked as an art designer within 10 miles of where her encounter took place. Suzanne was attending Northridge University, earning a bachelor's degree. She lived with her mother and brother in Van Nuys in Southern California. Actually, her ordeal began with a very dramatic UFO sighting near her home in the San Fernando Valley. What's interesting about this sighting is that the UFO was seen hovering over the highly technical Lockheed and Hughes aircraft installations and the Van Nuys Air Force Reserve Base. It was a summer night in 1980 when Suzanne and two friends witnessed a triangular formation of lights hovering in the sky. As an artist, Suzanne is a trained observer with an acute eye for details and an incredible memory. Because of this, she's able to fully describe her encounter. As she says in her own words, "It was a beautiful night, very clear, and it was very warm. I was standing there looking out and I realized that the sky didn't look normal. I'm looking at the moon and I'm thinking, that's not normal. It's all orange over there. It's 2 o'clock in the morning and it's orange." And so I was looking at it and I realized that what I was looking at was the glow coming off these three objects. There was one really big object and two smaller ones on either side of it and above it. As Suzanne studied the objects, she saw that they hovered below the horizon of the mountains. She estimated their distance to be about 10 miles, but like many UFO witnesses, she had trouble estimating the size of the objects. The objects in the middle was huge, and the ones on either side appeared to be about 1/3 of its size. When asked what the objects looked like, she replied, "Sort of a saucer shape. I mean, it was flat, and they appeared to be rounded, but they were so far away that I wasn't underneath them. I couldn't see under them. I was seeing more of a profile view. They were elliptical." Suzanne concluded that she was seeing three separate objects. As she says, they were hovering on either side of it, above it, so they formed a sort of a triangle. The big one was lower, and it was at the bottom point of the triangle. She said, "I sat there and watched them for a couple of minutes, and they weren't moving. All the orange glow in the night sky was coming off them. The objects, didn't appear orange. They appeared shiny, maybe metallic. But all this orange glow was around them. It was lighting up the whole area around them, orange, like streetlights glow. That's what it was like, but it was orange." Suzanne literally could not believe her own eyes and ran inside to get her friends. She dragged them out, pointing to the sky. "Do you see that?" she asked Suzanne's friend. Adlai Fredrickson remembers the incident well. Many UFO investigators have noticed a high number of UFO sightings around high-technology installations, and that is certainly true in this case. After the sighting, none of them thought there would be many future encounters. However, in Suzanne's case, it wasn't long before she had a truly incredible encounter, a face-to-face confrontation with two Grey-type alien beings. And this encounter occurred in the most unlikely place imaginable, right in front of the local elementary school. One evening in 1980, about 3 years following Suzanne's UFO sighting, she decided to take a walk with her dog around the block. She had no idea that she was about to walk into the single most terrifying experience of her entire life. Here Suzanne vividly describes what it's like to have a close-up encounter with extraterrestrials. "I was in college and my girlfriend and I did art projects together. We had this one project we were working on. We were collecting shopping trolleys that you find hanging out on street corners. Lonely shopping trolleys with nobody to push them around. We had already collected 2 or 3 and we were going to make this great art project out of them. We thought it was really esoteric, so we had these shopping trolleys." One night I was driving home. It must have been about 11:30 at night. It was quiet and very little activity out on the streets. I spotted another trolley. I don't know why it didn't occur to me to just stop and put it in my car. For some reason I thought, well, I'll drive home and I'll take Sarah, my dog, for a walk, and I'll go and get the shopping trolley and then put it in my car. The lonely shopping trolley was down on the corner of Strathern and Amerstoy. Amerstoy runs in front of Stagg Street Elementary School and Strathern runs across it. So for some reason, I decided that I should take my car home and go back and get the shopping cart and bring it home. Looking back at it, it would have made a hell of a lot more sense just to stop and put the shopping cart in my car and drive away. I had a station wagon, so the trolley would have easily gone into the back. So I called in home and got the dog and went for a walk, and we went to get the shopping trolley. I was walking in a circular route. I went up my street to Strathern, down Strathern to Amerstoy, picked up the shopping cart and was going past the school to Stagg. As I'm going down Amerstoy, I had to go past the school. I was being careful not to attract too much attention. I guess the shopping trolley made me look a little suspicious. There aren't lots of houses, almost no houses on that side because of the school, so I thought it would be very easy to get it past the school. So I'm making my way past the school and I got up near the front of the school gates where the administration block was. There, an open area, a theatre, and the administration area and the kindergarten, all on the school frontage and right in front of the theatre. There's a big illuminated open area with a flagpole. So I'm coming past there and I'm thinking I'm totally alone and I'm not going to be seen by anybody. Then I looked to my right and realized that there were two, what I thought at first were people. I thought there were just two people standing there talking. At this time the school's on my right and I was on the footpath in front of the school. It was at this point that Suzanne first began to realize that something strange was happening. She could understand two people standing in front of the school, but when she looked at them, she noticed immediately that something was horribly wrong with the way the people looked. At first she thought they were children and didn't pay too much attention, but as they got closer, she realized that there was no way they could be children. They looked much too different. Suzanne continues, "They were facing each other. As I looked at them, I started to notice they were kind of strange. They had on these dark green jumpsuits. They had really big heads, and they weren't very tall. They were like my height, about 5'4", but I wasn't really impacted with their presence until they turned to look at me. They turned simultaneously away from each other and both towards me without moving their feet. They just sort of hovered and turned." At this point, investigators asked Suzanne to describe exactly what the two figures looked like with all the details she could remember. She proceeded to give one of the clearest and most complete descriptions they'd ever heard. In Suzanne's own words, "Okay, the heads were really big. They were abnormally large, like twice the size of a human head. The skulls were grossly exaggerated. They didn't really seem to have any ears or nose, and they seemed to have some slight indication of a mouth. They had really big eyes. I don't really remember seeing whites in their eyes. I just remember that they had really big dark eyes, big almond eyes. Their heads were, well, it was like they had a big crease in their head, like two lobes. It was like you could see the lobes of their brain sticking out. Their arms were just hanging at their sides. It seemed like they had hands and their skin was all just pale, really, really white, like they could have been dead. They were so white. You know, if they had been human, they would have been dead. I don't remember seeing any feet, and their jumpsuits were all this dark olive green color, and it came up like a mandarin collar around their necks, and it was just very plain. I didn't notice much of anything. At the point when they turned to face me, I was parallel with them. We see each other, and as I keep walking, at the point to which I was straight in front of them, they were both standing facing me, and at that point, I realized that they weren't normal. They probably weren't human. They didn't move like humans. They didn't look like humans. Investigators asked Suzanne if the figures could possibly have been children wearing Halloween masks, but she denied this possibility. As she says, "No, I didn't really think they were children in masks. They were too big to be children unless they were maybe boys. They couldn't have been girls, unless they were totally flat-chested. It would have been an elaborate costume. They were identical, and they were in the spotlights where I could see them. But the light was behind them, so whatever was on their clothing all just kind of blended into the grey olive-green colour because the light was coming from over their shoulders. So I didn't see a lot of detail in their clothes. It was mostly silhouette, but their skin was so white it was pretty easy to see their eyes and the shape of their head. As Suzanne walked along the sidewalk, she approached to within 20 feet of the two figures. Her fright at this point bordered on panic. She didn't receive any mental messages, only an intense feeling of shock and fear. I felt like I got more and more scared as I realized more and more that this was something I'd never experienced before. They didn't move like humans either. They didn't look like humans. They didn't say anything. The point at which I would have had to start looking back over my shoulder at them, and by that point I was so scared all I could think about was just getting the hell out of there. And the whole time I'm pushing this stupid shopping trolley and it's rattling down the road. Sarah, my dog, didn't freak out at all. She just kept walking next to me the whole time. She sure didn't go up and try to sniff them. I was terrified, I didn't know what they were. I didn't. At one point I thought, my God, they're going to follow me home. Oh no, I'm going to die. I'm so scared. So I was walking as fast as I could without running, and without making an enormous amount of noise with the stupid shopping trolley. Once I got out of the light, and a little way down the road, there was a clump of bushes. I ditched the shopping trolley in the bushes and all I wanted to do was get out of there, without running, without being obviously frightened to death. I didn't run, I walked as fast as I could straight home without looking over my shoulder. I felt that they were right behind me the whole time, but I didn't look over my shoulder. Suzanne's encounter with extraterrestrials, although extremely frightening, was actually totally benign. They never hurt her, followed her, or made any aggressive actions. Her fear was based solely on her own shock at seeing something so totally out of her normal experience. In fact, the shock of seeing them was so great that Suzanne says it was like being woken up when you're awake. At the time of the encounter, Suzanne had no idea what she was seeing. She'd never read anything about UFOs, and her knowledge of the subject was limited to her own recent sighting. Yet her description of the alien beings matches the descriptions of other witnesses, detail for detail. The large bald heads, the short stature, the white skin, the large almond eyes, the total lack of visible ears, nose and mouth, the greenish jumpsuits, the alien's identical appearance. All of these details corroborate exactly with other reports of which Suzanne knew nothing. In fact, Suzanne simply assumed that it was a unique experience. It bewildered her to such an extent that she told nobody about it for several years. One detail that absolutely astonished Suzanne was the way the figures moved in perfect unison. This detail has been observed over and over again by other witnesses. The alien abduction researcher Bud Hopkins had written a book entitled Intruders, where he lists several cases that involve the simultaneous leaning, blinking, and stepping of alien creatures. It's as if they are so telepathic that they're able to predict each other's movements. Still another detail that adds to the authenticity of her account is how it began. Suzanne had the totally illogical impulse to delay the picking up of her shopping cart until she could return to it and push it home. Her hindsight showed her how illogical this impulse was. Suzanne, of course, had no idea that many other people's encounters often begin in the same way. Preludes to many missing time abductions often include bizarre impulses to drive or walk to certain areas. Suzanne had no idea how close she was to having a full-blown contact. As far as she knows, she didn't have any missing time. She had no nightmares of the incident, nor has she found any mysterious scars on her body that might indicate an abduction-type experience. She does admit, however, that it is possible that her experience was more extensive than she can remember. She doesn't remember the exact time she left her home, nor the exact time she returned. However, if she did have missing time, she has no desire to undergo hypnosis and dredge up memories of an experience that was already considerably traumatizing. One detail that made Suzanne doubt she saw aliens was the lack of a UFO. It wasn't until much later that Suzanne even connected her previous UFO sighting to the concept of extraterrestrials, simply because there was no craft associated with this encounter. She does admit, however, that it would have been quite easy for a large craft to have landed in the enclosed playground of the school. It may seem incredible that her encounter took place in front of an elementary school in a crowded suburb. However, as many UFO researchers will tell you, this is not at all unusual. Many have investigated several other encounters that have taken place in the oddest locations, including hotels, condominiums, on freeways, even inside hospital rooms. It seems that the aliens have reached such a high level of technology that they can easily elude detection. In fact, less than 2 miles from the school, an entire family experienced a dramatic series of UFO encounters that started with simple sightings of star-like objects darting about the night sky and became dramatic bedroom visitations by Grey-type aliens and culminated in at least 4 abductions, complete with bizarre experiments and a baby presentation aboard an alien craft. All this, of course, took place over a densely crowded suburb in the San Fernando Valley. Did the intelligence agencies of the United States government use reverse-engineered alien technology to contact extraterrestrial beings elsewhere in the universe? And did this apparent communication attempt result in a top-secret deal that would see even more advanced technology be gifted to the American government? According to apparently leaked intelligence documents, that is exactly what happened. According to the allegedly leaked documents in 1952, in response to the recovery of several crashed UFOs in the late 1940s and early 1950s, an unofficial consortium made up of members of the CIA and NSA was put together. They would operate under the codename Project Sigma, and their purpose, as well as learning how to reverse engineer this alien technology, was to do so with the aim of making contact with aliens themselves. This they managed, and after identifying a suspicious group of asteroids, they used this advanced device to send out a secret transmission. Surprisingly, even to them, they would receive an almost immediate reply. It is claimed that as a result of this transmission was 2 separate face-to-face meetings between President Eisenhower and representatives from 2 different alien races. This meeting was said to have taken place on the evening of February 20th, 1954 at Edwards Air Force Base in California. What is worth noting is that on that evening, Eisenhower did in fact go missing, causing temporary rumors that he had died. When the White House addressed the rumors, they assured the public that the president had required emergency dental work from which he was recovering. It is said that rather than recovering from dental surgery, Eisenhower was in talks with a race of extraterrestrials called the Nordics, or as they are tagged in the report, the Blues, in an empty hangar at the airbase. They would offer technology that was advanced around medicine and enabling the United States to move away from fossil fuels and towards cleaner, environmentally friendly energy. Whatever the finer details of the discussion were, no deal was reached. Almost immediately following this meeting, however, a second race of extraterrestrials suddenly made contact and a second meeting went ahead. This race of aliens was the Greys, who appear to be exactly the same extraterrestrials that many victims of alien abduction report. This communication and arrival of this second group of aliens was not a complete surprise to Eisenhower and those involved with the project. According to the report, the Blues had warned them of their presence, claiming they had a formidable force just at the edge of the solar system. What's more, this fleet kept Earth under constant surveillance and was locked into the planet's orbit. The Greys would also offer technology to the Americans, and in return, they asked for free access to the population. Essentially, they could abduct them and perform experiments for their own learning. Following these procedures, they would wipe their memories clean and return them to where they were taken from. What's more, a full list of abductees would be provided to the government, and only a very limited number of people would be taken. Perhaps unbelievably, a deal was made, and an abundance of technology soon found its way into the hands of American scientists under various projects of the intelligence agencies. There have been some suggestions that this deal was made not only for the technology itself, but to prevent a similar deal from being made with their Cold War nemesis, the Soviet Union. If these claims were true, it is not that much of a stretch of the imagination to think that Eisenhower would have felt it necessary to come to a seemingly drastic arrangement in order to keep such advancement out of the hands of those on the other side of the Iron Curtain. The reason given by the Greys for the need to experiment with humans was their need to understand human DNA. This was so they could create an alien-human hybrid in order to address the problem of their own degraded DNA. Part of this deal, it is claimed, was to use female members of the population as unwitting incubators for these hybrid entities. Incidentally, many researchers into the alien abduction phenomenon have independently come to similar conclusions, that the main reason behind these harrowing encounters is to create just such an alien-human hybrid. However, unlike the details of the deal allegedly agreed upon in 1954, the real goal of these extraterrestrial visitors is to colonize the planet with these alien-human hybrids, discreetly and without the population even being aware of it. It might be worth our while examining just one such case where it appears an unfortunate woman from California was used by these alien creatures in just such a way. In 1988, professional photographer Kim Carlsberg, who later discovered she was a repeat abductee, witnessed a bizarre craft over the Pacific coast. Later that evening, she awoke to find herself surrounded by strange, grey alien entities. She would later describe being taken on board the craft, where she was artificially inseminated with a combination of her DNA, another human male DNA, and alien DNA. Only weeks later, before she was even aware she was pregnant, she was abducted again. The fetus was removed during this secondary abduction and placed inside an artificial chamber where it would eventually reach birth size. What's more, this was a prearranged, highly organized program. Her claim sounds almost identical to the objectives laid out by the Greys in Project Sigma. While many people believe this program is far from the benefit of humanity, it is Carlsberg's belief that if the aliens desire to integrate the hybrids into the world to help save it. A similar encounter to Carlsberg unfolded the previous year in Las Vegas in 1987. Brett Olden and his pregnant girlfriend, Diane Swanson, claimed to have been abducted from their bedroom by grey aliens and taken on board a bizarre spacecraft. They performed several experiments, including the precise removal of Diane's unborn baby. The following day, when she sought medical advice, she realized something was wrong. Doctors were completely perplexed as the surgical precision that the fetus had been removed with. Even stranger, 3 years later, Brett would claim to have been abducted by the same aliens once more. This time, however, he was taken to what he believed to be an alien-human hybrid who carried with her a young girl, who also appeared to be a hybrid. Although he didn't know why, he knew that this young girl was his and Diane's child that had been removed from her mother before she had been born. Was this yet another abduction that was a consequence of that alleged top-secret deal that would result in Project Sigma? Is it further proof that such outlandish suggestions as secret deals with alien races for technology might actually be closer to reality than any of us would ever wish to imagine? There were, although several further conditions stipulated by the Greys at the time of this deal being struck. They would stress, for example, that the United States government must never reveal that a deal had been made, nor should they even acknowledge their presence on Earth. They would further insist on no interference whatsoever in their programs, nor should they even be questioned on any aspect of it. The Greys also required several underground bases to be built by the United States with advanced technology that they would provide to them. Needless to say, these bases would be of a top-secret nature, and they would feature both United States military personnel and a grey alien presence. Although figures vary depending on what source you go to, it's claimed that there could be as many as 30 of these subterranean facilities around the United States today. Ultimately, and although they were only rumors, it is thought that the grey aliens began to stray from the rules of the deal as the decades went on. It's not known if the deal of this arrangement is still in place, if in an altered fashion, or in its original form, or whether there is a secret war of sorts taking place behind closed doors of the so-called shadow government, a war that could potentially see the planet taken over without us even realizing it. Might this inability or unwillingness to adhere to the rules of the deal be the reason claims of alien abduction increased so dramatically as the 70s gave way to the 80s, and then even more so as the 20th century handed control over to the 21st? Might this group of seemingly opportunistic alien entities that we refer to as the Greys have assumed control from behind the scenes? Could it be that this assumed control, through the insertion of alien-human hybrids into our society, has already begun? Might it already be too late? One of the most persistent rumors of the Roswell UFO crash is that the United States military did indeed recover an alien vehicle that day in New Mexico in 1947. And what's more, they systematically reverse-engineered it behind closed doors before presenting these advancements to the American public as the latest development in the technological revolution of our modern age. The CEO of a small business based in Cranford, New Jersey, named the American computer company, Jack Schulman, burst into the public spotlight in December 1997, when he claimed to have proof that technology from the Roswell crash had indeed been secretly reverse-engineered under the watchful eye of the United States military. According to Schulman, the military would discreetly gift this technology to various American companies who would then reverse-engineer it in multiple ways before they would patent it as scientific breakthroughs in all manner of fields and industries. And while these developments would be offered to the general public in the form of the latest television, computer, or phone, behind the scenes, the military would have first access to this cutting-edge technology and likely reserve the right to keep anything they saw fit for their exclusive purposes. Schulman would highlight the patenting of the transistor by the Bell Labs company in particular, asking what if this had, in fact, been developed as a result of reverse-engineered technology, that they had been one of the companies to whom the United States military had passed this technology with the orders of reverse-engineering it. Ultimately, Schulman claimed to have proof to back up what he was suggesting in the form of a leaked handbook that he referred to as the Lab Shopkeeper's Notebook. He wouldn't initially divulge how he had come into possession of the documents, although it would later come to light, according to an article for Atlantis Rising by John Kettler, that he had been given access to it by the widow of a man named Jeff Proskauer. He would claim that this notebook of documents offered a detailed account of the Roswell crash, as well as what exactly was found and where it was taken. Schulman, through his company, the American Computer Company, would spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on various experts in an effort to have the documents validated. One of the companies mentioned in these files, according to Schulman, was indeed Bell Labs, and more specifically, their invention of the transistor. This was, as John Kettler writes, an invention that alone was worth anything from Nobel Prizes and increased corporate reputations to hundreds of patents and trillions of dollars. Even more suspicious, when investigations were undertaken to examine the apparent development from previous transistors to the Bell version, transistors that were claimed to have been the origins of the Bell transistor, not only were the two completely different, but there was no natural technical evolvement that would have led from one being developed into the other. In short, the Bell version was essentially completely new technology. As bizarre as it might sound, could it really be that one of the most significant inventions of the so-called technical revolution was not one of human ingenuity, but gifted alien technology that was, albeit skillfully, reverse-engineered? In light of Shulman's claims, it's worth our time examining some of the statements of Philip Corso, who in the book The Day After Roswell would claim he was tasked with untraceably transferring alien technology to such huge companies as Bell Labs, IBM, and Monsanto as far back as the early 1960s. Corso would further offer that these companies would be forced to sign official secret acts, agreeing to develop the technology as their own and to report it publicly as the groundbreaking research of American scientists. Further, according to Corso, just some of these technologies included fiber optics and advanced night vision technologies. Shulman had long connections with the Bell Labs organization himself, having gone to college with the son of the head of the company. He later elaborated that in late 1995, a friend and a former general in the Pentagon, who he knew through his friend's family, the previously mentioned widow of Jeff Prosoka, had approached him and asked him to look at some documents that were the lab shopkeeper's notebook. It's important to note at this stage that the reference to a notebook is not how you might typically imagine. Rather than being a small collection of papers, it's simply an industry term loosely used to keep documentation of ongoing studies, experiments, and developments. And this notebook that Shulman faced ran to 28 boxes of documentation. Some of the documents he viewed shocked him due to concerning technology that was at least officially out of humanity's reach in the mid-1990s, but that this paperwork clearly stated was available for use as far back as the late 1940s. It was at this point that Shulman had the papers carbon dated. The results were certain. The papers had been prepared when their dates said they had between 1947 and 1950. Ultimately, they were genuine. Eventually, Shulman put forward the question to online forum users about what it might mean if significant human technological inventions were in fact the result of reverse-engineered non-terrestrial technology. Shortly after these online questions, he began to suffer a tirade of ominous happenings. To begin with, these unsettling incidents would surface in the form of hostile messages left on internet forums, largely designed to tarnish the American Computer Corporation's reputation and image. These would quickly escalate into online attacks on Shulman personally. As well as the abuse and threats hurled directly at Shulman and the American Computer Corporation, there was a wider campaign to paint him as a deranged and possibly dangerous individual. Even more unnerving, the business premises of the company were broken into several times, some of which would result in the planting of classified information in the offices in some kind of bizarre attempt to frame them. The company would soon go on the offensive, taking swift legal action against any cases of slander against it, as well as heightening security around its offices. And perhaps more importantly, Shulman began to speak publicly of at least some of what he had learned in the lab shopkeeper's notebook, and even more importantly, began putting technical information and data of these findings online in an attempt to stop them becoming patented and ultimately off-limits to the wider public. Could it be possible that at least some of the technological wonders of our modern world are actually the result of reverse-engineered extraterrestrial technology? It can't be ignored that such technological advancements surged forward from the late 1940s, coincidentally or not, in the years immediately following the alleged Roswell crash. And we should also note that despite the claims of the military that the object witnessed was merely a weather balloon, the original military statement to the press that they had a flying saucer in their possession shouldn't be immediately dismissed. Indeed, given how many people do seem to ignore this initial military response to the media, it could just prove to be the biggest bullet in the United States government and military ever dodged in terms of the UFO and alien question. Could there be any truth to Shulman's claims? Given the amount of online abuse, physical break-ins at their offices, and very real attempts to sabotage his business, we might assume that somebody was not happy with the suggestions he was making and his ultimate declaration of the explosive documents he had in his possession. We might ask if there's any truth to the notion that corporations overseen by the United States government had highly advanced technology with which to study and work with. What else might be available behind closed doors? What technologies, for example, might be being withheld from the public so as to maintain the highest profit margins possible, or to keep people as rabid consumers? Might technologies even exist, but are being held behind closed doors that could provide much cleaner energy and fuel so as not to disturb the flow of millions of dollars to the energy industries? There is, it seems, much more to think about here than just the claims of alien technology, but what the potential of that technology might mean if it were to be shared with humanity as a whole, and not simply drip-fed to the masses as upgrades and newer versions of various devices for immediate financial return. There is a saying in the technical world that whatever the public knows is available behind closed doors, the government is actually 3 or 4 decades ahead. If the claims of Jack Schulman are accurate, that saying could have much more truth in it than most of us might think.